So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second event in our Personalizing History series, the African American Genealogy Workshop. And we're so pleased you could join us this evening. I'm Dory Gottschalk-Fielding from the Seymour Library's History Discovery Center, and we have as our special guest tonight, Dr. Shelley Viola Murphy. Our Personalizing History series is made possible through a Humanities Grant for Libraries. American Rescue Plan Humanities Grants for Libraries is an initiative of the American Library Association, made possible with funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. We are so pleased to have Dr. Murphy with us again tonight. Dr. Murphy, also known as Family Tree Girl, has been an avid genealogist for over 30 years. She was born and raised in Michigan and now lives in Central Virginia. She conducts genealogy workshops at local, state, and national conferences. Dr. Murphy is known for her inspiring and interactive So What method with genealogical research, along with interesting problem-solving methodology such as the use of timelines. She serves on the boards of the Library of Virginia and the Albemarle, Charlottesville, and Fluvanna Historical Societies. She's the president, coordinator, and instructor at the Midwest African American Genealogical Institute and develops staff and public educational programs for the Center for Family History at the International African American Museum, which opens this fall. She holds membership in AAHGS, NGS, APG, DAR, and local genealogy groups. She's currently working for the University of Virginia as the Descendant Project researcher, seeking descendants of the enslaved laborers who built the university. She's also been an adjunct professor at Everett University since 2009. Dr. Murphy's personal research focuses on Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Virginia, West Virginia, South Carolina, Tennessee, and even parts of upstate New York. And Dr. Murphy, I will now turn the workshop over to you.
I am ready. Here I am. And thank you for that introduction. And yes, I have a lot of connections to New York. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. And for those of you that are here and listening, what I did in the first workshop was talked about some challenges and things that people will come across when doing research, and also some techniques that are really good. So for the workshop, I picked a couple of the things that were talked about in the first session, which is going to be timelines, and also knowing records create records. So these are the type of techniques that you want to add to your toolbox as a researcher that will help you work through some of the challenges. So can you see my screen okay? Okay, great. Okay. There. So overview, again, I'm going to talk about records creating records and a brief overview about timelines in case people weren't here for the first session. And then we're going to walk through how to do and actually fill in and spend some time on looking at what needs to go into the timeline. And I really think that records create records is a good exercise because hopefully it changes your way of thinking. So again, I want to cover about being organized because as you conduct this research, we're getting piles, we're getting stacks, we're getting binders. So just make sure you have some type of a system for filing and saving and retrieving your research. Get you a good resource book, or a guide, something that you can follow. There's a lot of them out there. And begin with what you know. Either you start with yourself or you start with one of your parents, depending on what side of the family you're going with. And then again, you want to ask questions about what you don't know. And then you're going to realize that there might be someone that could know, or maybe a document or a piece of evidence could know the information that you're missing. I want you to stay inside the box. Don't jump out and go down, on trails. Stay in the box and try to do a little deeper research to help yourself and go at the local level. You're going to have challenges no matter what. We just want you to stick to the basics. So, folks that have heard me before, I talk about no magic in genealogical research. Oh my goodness, there is not. There is definitely no magic. It does not just appear on the desktop or appear in front of us. You want to set a goal for your research. What are you trying to focus on? Are you trying to find something like, maybe I need to find a marriage record? Maybe I can't find a death record. Maybe I see my second great grandparents in the 1870 census and I can't find them prior to that. Well, again, make the goals short, specific, and to the point. So in other words, don't say, I want to know everything about the Fletcher family or everything about the Gilliard family. That's too big. Split it up. Determine what records and resources and what you want to know. And you want to start gathering that stuff up. Whoever you're starting with, your maternal side or your paternal side, gather that stuff up. And then, of course, you're going to put that information in a timeline. Hopefully, you want to question and analyze the information. You got to review what you have and determine what is next. What do I go after next? And then you're going to summarize and write up that story or share it with the family. So here's my Murphy's rules. If you haven't heard them from the first session, you're hearing them now. Every topic I talk on, I always talk about these basics. You want to follow the money, the land, the water, the community, and the faith of the people. And you want to make this almost like a checklist. Where did they pay, property tax at? Did they buy and sell land? Or were they enslaved? Were they sold? Were they rented? Is there any migrations going along in that county? Right? So you're going to follow that water from, if there's a waterway going out from the county, because maybe they're in Virginia right now, and maybe the next place they're at is Alabama, or maybe they went up to New York. You have to travel by water when you're migrating. And then again, what's the history of that community that you know? What happened there? Were there specific events that you need to be aware of, or even certain people? If we go to the census record, which is a genealogist or family historian's go-to document, that's the first place we go. Well, who's in the neighborhood? Who is around your people? And you want to start making note. And sometimes you might just take yourself, through an exercise that you're looking at one census to another and seeing if they got the same neighbors. Then you know where they're at. And then you want, for last on the Murphy's rule, is following the faith of the people. When I first come into a county in a new state or just a new county, I'm looking for the courthouse, I'm looking for the churches, and I'm looking for the schools. And is there a list of the cemeteries? Those are some of the basic things you need to find out. Then I want to find out if any events or anything happened during the Civil War, depending on where you're researching. Was anything happen? Could be the Revolutionary War, anything happening, any big fires or some tragedy events that happened during the time frame that your ancestors at. These are things that you put together pretty much as a checklist for yourself, okay? So there are benefits to using a timeline. Number one, it keeps things organized, and the information is going to be in chronological order. One document can have citations. It's a document that's got the citations, the resources. And this document, the timeline, can be in Word or Excel. It doesn't matter. You're able to see things that could have impacted your ancestors and the community that they lived in. And as you can see on the picture, somebody made up a timeline as a display for their family tree. And they're putting up the year a war was going on, what period they were in, and so forth. There's other benefits. Conflicts and gaps are going to jump out. They're going to give you actually a hint or a lead of something that you need to resolve. The next steps on your timeline are the beginnings of your research plan. And you'll see this when we run through the form. Timelines could be very, very fancy and simple. The document is always searchable. So here is some droplets of things that you're going to want to know. And again, you set that goal, decide what you're trying to find, right? And who or what could also have some supporting evidence. So determine what resources and tools you're going to need. It might be that it's not an online access to some database. Maybe you have to go at the local level. Maybe you have to contact Historical Society or the local library and find out what do they have. What events, again, as I mentioned earlier, what happened during the time your folks were there? What's the county or the community events that could have impacted your ancestor? And if I think about like the Civil War or Revolutionary War, what were your people doing during that time? So you might have to do a little bit more reading. So what happened within our families? There's always birth, death, wills, marriages, divorces, and the exchange of land. Think about it. The money is moving, the land is there. There could be something with the church. The gaps in the next steps is always going to come out. That's so what that Dory mentioned earlier. That's when you start questioning what's on a document. It is okay to question the document, the information that's on there. Think about us going to that census record and that's probably inaccurate information because number one, we don't know who gave the information depending on when it was and what time frame you're looking at. Those earlier census, like the early 1800s, it's very limited. And is it accurate? Was it the kid that was next door that provided that information to that enumerator? So a lot of things can get resolved or get twisted around. So again, a timeline is a very good place to keep things in order. So when you're building the timeline, you automatically know that births, marriages, and deaths and those things listed are going to be there. So if I'm looking at a maternal grandparent or whoever, and they got a husband and there's children, I am going down the line. Every kid that's born, every kid that dies, gets married, who else dies, the dad or the mom, any wills that came in, and you got to make sure you got the date, or if nothing else, just a year. Any settlements, even divorces, all of that. Every 10 years, you're going to have a federal census. If the county that you're working for or the state had a state census, that's going to be incorporated in there. But you also want to make note of who's in the house and what you're questioning, right? At any time we're looking at a census or any type document that's going to have a list of names. Any other federal or state schedules, if it pertains to your people or your individual, right? And it could be their land. Maybe they had a farm and they're in the agricultural census, or maybe they sold some land or something happened. Maybe there's a court case. You want to enter this information on the timeline. So you think about each timeline has to do with something that affected or impacted your ancestor. I talked about the events. Well, if you're going to come through from Revolutionary War and come forward, you're going to have to think, what other wars were there? Don't forget 1812. You know, whatever happened in that local history, you want to log that in there. One of the things I hear quite often when I do these presentations, just specifically about timeline, is that, hey, I've got ancestry.com. And they do a timeline built right online. You populate the information. What Ancestry does not have, in which you have to add to that timeline, is anything that's local, anything that's oral history, anything that is not on a record that, you know, came down generation by generation that is pertinent to this ancestor or whoever you're researching. Okay. And so this is the difference from you doing it and Ancestry doing it. Because again, they can't put oral history out there unless somebody documented and uploaded it and into their server. You add it in your timeline, or you add it under the facts for their timeline. This is the timeline form. This is a Word document, and it is nothing but a simple table. I created all the little things here, abbreviations. You create whatever you want. Whatever it is that you create using either Word or Excel, you want something that is going to be simple enough that you're going to be consistent. And that means that you know you're going to keep putting the document or the information in the document. So let's run through this. We got the person we're going to have here, and it could be the family. And of course, you're going to start with the dad and the mom. Put their name, date of birth and where they were born, spouse, where she was born. And then those are just the codes. Make up the codes yourself if you have something that's easier for you to remember. And again, it's about being consistent. Set your goal. You can have 10 goals. You can have more than one timesheet. You can do it on one individual, especially if it's a brick wall. I use these for brick walls mainly. And because I got to get things organized and find out about this individual and everything about them. So my goals are going to be short, and I might come in here 6 months or a year later, add me another goal, or take out this line and start bulleting or numbering them. Remember, Word document. Then I've got, maybe it's a brick wall I'm working on, and this is my hypothesis. I'm looking for William Michael Murphy, and I know he married, or assume he married, a Nellie McCorkle, and I know they had one child. I don't know if they had any other children. So my goal is to find a marriage record of those two people. And that my hypothesis is where they might be, because we can't find any information on them. So again, so my goal is consistently trying to resolve the marriage of these two people. So this is a table, and I have changed this over years. This one right now is what works best for me and what I do. I've got the date, and you want to actually input the date. These little columns and rows will expand by you typing. So again, choose the type size. I use 12. Sometimes I reduce it to 10 or 11, depending on the information. This is such an easy document I can hand off to somebody. The date, and then of course we're going to the name. The name the way it is on a document or wherever you got it from, whatever it is. And if it's misspelled, that's what you want to put here, because you can come over here to notes and questions and say, this document is misspelled on the census. This is the correct way. But I want you to put whatever is on the document in name. And why would you think I would say that? Because you know what? If I hand this off to another family member, they're not going to find it under the correct spelling. They're going to find a document just like you did under the misspelled name. You want the age? So you start somebody with birth, or think about this. Maybe I've got my grandfather, and I'm going to leave the first, say that I'm doing this on my grandfather. I'm going to leave the first 2 rows blank because I want to know who his parents were, just as another example. So he's going to actually start on the 3rd line, and I know I can come back, or I can add a row or a column at any time. So collect the information that you want that basically is going to end up being a story. You're telling about the life of, say, William Michael Murphy, or whatever the person is you're looking at, and everything in date order that impacted him or affected him or was around him. So you got name, age, the event, which I talked about on the previous slide, the location. Put the whole county. Don't just put state. If you don't know what county it is, but you know the state, then tell yourself over here in the notes and questions that I need to find out what county it is and what place, or what do I have to do to find out what county that ancestor was in. And then you talk about different records, which would be your next steps to go find these different records. And then, of course, you tell yourself when you completed whatever it is the next steps. So location, then you got resource and citation. You can name the document or the reference or the resource and put the citation in. And you know what? You can put an active hyperlink in this box, so you can always go back and click it. So again, if I share this with another researcher or family member, they can follow the same type information of where I got it from, because I can have an active link in here. Note the informant and the witnesses on any document. Why? Because I'm going to go over here and question, are they related? Are they related, or what is the connection? Are they in the neighborhood of where that ancestor is at, depending on what you're putting through here as far as an event? And then maybe you don't understand and you want to find out who they are. And then you go to next steps. What do I have to do to find out who or more information about the informant or a witness that is on a document? And again, next steps are your research plan. You are building your research plan by what you're writing and telling yourself in questioning under notes and questions. There's your next steps. Always try to tell yourself, I looked that information, or I checked Jefferson County, West Virginia for whatever it is, or, you know, Albany, New York, whatever it is. I looked at it on Ancestry, and you're telling yourself, so you are not repeating work over and over. So it's very simple. I know it's a lot of information. And if there's something else you want to ask or question, add another column. You can do whatever you want to do. My loss and goings file is 31 pages. And again, I'm building he had 7 or 8 children, and I went through all their marriages and deaths, and as far as the children. And again, think about it. What do I have? I've got the whole story on this family with evidence to back it up, but also questions and anything that happened orally, you know, as far as coming down from oral history. So here's a little brief look at what I'm saying needs to go in each of these boxes. Just walk through here. You know, date, you want to make sure that date column is going to be in order. If I put 1850 here as when somebody was, say, born, then the next thing is going to be after 1850. Anytime you find new information, you add another row. Okay? Keep this in chronological order. And this comes back to our brains and how we're looking at things and processing things. Okay. You want the name the way it's listed on a document. This is what I just went through. You want any events. Any events. And I know I skipped over age, but think about it, especially when you got census. Maybe you'll see two census, and of course, they're in chronological order, and the ages don't add up because there should be about 10 years in between the census that'll be documented. And maybe there's 20 years or 15. You want to see if you can't resolve that and find out, well, where does this other age come? Or now you got a birth range versus a specific year because you got so many different dates for somebody's birth or their marriage and things like that. So again, you're putting anything out here and it's in order and you're showing where it happened at. You're showing where that resource or citation is at, so you can always go back to it. You're talking about who else was a witness or around the document. And when I put census in, a lot of times I'll put in here who's in the house, because maybe somebody should be in that house in the 1870 census and they're not. And so my question is, well, where are they? And where should I look for that person? Could they have went, is it around Civil War or a war or World War II, whatever the time is? And then again, like I mentioned before, you want to either number or use bullets or a dash for each of the items that you say you need to do as next steps. Maybe you're conducting a so what of asking questions on a document, and the questions that you're asking are either numbered or bullet here of telling you what to go do about it. Okay. So if I say I can't find the birth under this county, then I'm saying go check these counties, and that's in my bullet list. And then I come back and say, well, June 17th, 2022, I looked at the marriage record collection on Ancestry, Family Search, whatever it is. Okay. So that should give you an overview of what's on the timeline. And again, I want to, just go back through that. You got to tell yourself that you completed in what date, because you will repeat things if you don't. And when I first started in genealogy, well over 30 years ago, I don't even know how, it was towards the end of the 1970s. And I was married, and I know my husband and I, we were stationed over in Hawaii. And it was like, okay, what did she say? Talking about my mom, because she was the researcher. And so I kept looking at this 1880 census because it was always free. So that's some things that are on Ancestry are free, and you don't have to have the paid membership. And then I got exposed to Family Search back here in the late 70s, and then realized that there always have been free. That's the church, and they're not going to charge. So again, it's about managing your time, setting a goal specifically, and then you putting some research energy behind it, and then questioning and answering what you find. Okay, so let's do a quick, any questions on the timelines while I'm here before we go through another exercise? Is there any questions? You can put them in the chat or unmute yourself, and or if you want to share something regarding something you've done with the timeline.
I have a question.
Yes.
For the timeline. I'm doing the Boxley's family. My mom's maternal mother, on her mother's side, her grandfather was a Boxley. On her father's side, his grandmother was a Boxley. I don't know if they were related. Do I put the book on the same timeline?
Yes. And you make a note of just what you just said. Okay. Yes. And number one, and I know you do slave era research too, because that's key. If two people become married and they've got the same surname, number one, I can think, okay, somebody is using the married name and not using the maiden name, or they came off the same plantation and they both took that same name. Doesn't necessarily mean it was the slaveholder's name, but they both had the same name because they came off of the same plantation. And I'm finding that in my own research that, wait a minute, they've got the same name. So does that mean something got recorded only in her married name? And also, and Marquita, and I know you know this, but for folks that are brand new, when you use Ancestry and even Family Search and you're building these trees online, always use the maiden name of the female. That's what the database is telling you to do. But a lot of people don't, and they want to add that married name. Think about that database. If I say my name is Shelley Viola Murphy, Murphy is my maiden name. My married name is Williams. Now, if I put my name in, say I'm searching Shelley Williams, right? It's only going to look for Shelley Williams. But what about me, Shelley Viola Murphy, before I got married? You need the maiden name in there, especially if you're trying to find a marriage record or something where these two families came together. So just remember, that's a clear tip. And thanks for triggering that in my head, Marquita, because you want to use that maiden name, even if it's the same, because then you're going to find some supporting evidence that they either have the same surname, as in cases a lot of enslaved individuals, or somebody just put an error. You want that database to associate Shelley Viola Murphy and Shelley Viola Williams. And this is how databases work, because whatever you put in there for that name, it's going to only search that association. And so when you build the trees, just make sure you do it. And make note, if something doesn't make sense, like Marquita's question, then you talk to yourself in the notes and questions, and tell yourself. So think about this document being handed off to somebody. So they'll say, well, wait a minute, why both of these people got the same surname as in Boxley? You got a note and a question referencing that. Can you resolve that? Well, if it's during slave era time, then that's one of your questions that you're going to put over here, is to find out if they came off of the same plantation or owned by the same person. Does that help?
It did. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else before I move on? I'm going to keep going. Okay. So this is a great exercise. I have fun with this, actually. And don't look at the right, even though I know everybody's looking at the right. So think about it. You got a death certificate, and it could be any record. I'm using this as the typical one that we're going to find, because we're going after, when we first get started on one of our lines, we're going after marriages and death certificates, birth certificates, and things like that. So records can create other records. Don't look at the right, only look at the left column. When someone passes, you get a death certificate or a death record gets issued. It could even be an entry in a ledger that somebody died. So then I want you to think of 3 or more records that get created from that death record. And I listed them on the right so you can see the answers. So is there any other records that get created besides the death record you're seeing up there, right? You've got an obituary that could be created because somebody died. There could be a death record, death certificate, coroner's report, something in a newspaper. Doesn't have to be an obituary. Maybe they're being acknowledged for something, and it includes a death date in that honoring somebody for something they did. A church record. Churches have records just like everybody else, and especially on the people that are in their membership. Okay, a lot of times the obituary gives you a genealogical tree in there. A funeral home record gets created. There could be something else, maybe because somebody has died and a will has surfaced or was already created, but now that has to come to the front because that person has passed. And now you got some public records. And I can't see the chat, but if folks, put in there and think about that, what other records are created once you get a death certificate? A lot of people, when they first get started, once they get a death certificate, they're done, or a death record, they're done. That's the end of someone's life. There's nothing else to research. So the next question, and if there's some there, somebody can share them, unmute and share what you see on there. If there's another record that gets created because of the death record.
So far in the chat, we've had people mention probate,
yes,
burial card, will,
yes,
a funeral program, a Bible record, or in the newspaper, a thank you for love and support for a family who died recently that might also mention the date.
Yes. And you know what? They also could mention some connection. And also think about that. Now, somebody comments on a find a grave, or how the funeral homes now, people can leave notes and messages to the family regarding, somebody passing. Well, how do they connect? Start questioning. Wait a minute. Somebody just wrote here, miss you, Uncle so-and-so, and it's like, oh, well, who is this? Then you try to find them and contact them. So you got even another level of thinking once you get, because each one of these records trigger more questions with more information or more missing information. So anytime, and like I said, I'm just using a death certificate. I could bring a marriage certificate and say the same thing. Records can create a record. I've got a marriage record or a marriage certificate. And you know what? What are 3 or more? And I hypothetically create 3 or more. It could be as many as you can find, right? And once you got a marriage certificate or a marriage record, what other records now are created because of that? And think about it. And always include a will, because now you got a couple, they might not have had individual wills. Maybe they have a will because now there's children in the family. Or looking at the marriage, maybe there's bank account records, right? And again, you can hit the newspaper. You got any of the articles about them getting married, divorced, or passing. And again, got a marriage record. Hopefully the marriage record had their parents on there. A lot of them do, a lot of them don't. If they don't have the parents of the bride and the parents of the groom, there you go on the timeline. You're making a note. That's my next step. Go find the parents of the bride, and maybe you're taking it from a newspaper article or reading from an obituary, and you're going to ask the same question. What other records are created because I've got this document or this source of information in front of me? And so I think it's really key to make you question and also say what else is next. Because just because you get a document and you have it, that should kick off that you're just getting started on something. So I use the example of a death certificate and a marriage certificate. It could be an estate settlement. Think about it, an estate settlement. It could be a chancery court case. I'm looking at one now that's 196 pages. You can't imagine how many questions after I read something that comes up or something doesn't make sense, or wait a minute, I didn't know this, and now you got some evidence. Then what is next? What is this record that I have? Even back to the death certificate, what is it telling me? What is it not telling me? And then I've got to say, like I use an example of, I need a record. I do a lot of DAR stuff, but it can be for anything. I need to know if this is a mother and a daughter, right? I want to make sure this is a mother and a daughter. What records, here we go, 3 or more records that will list a mother-daughter relationship. Think that way, try to get inside the box. You're staying in there, so you're taking a deeper dive. I've got a death certificate up here, and automatically I shoot down to number 17 box, and it talks about the informant. Well, it's telling me how they relate. She is the daughter of the deceased, but you see, she's got a different last name. It's not Hart. Automatically, to finish out that tree, I'm going to go find a marriage record for Martha E. Hart. So ding, 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 because if there's children, then you've got a whole nother line to go. So this is the concept of every record creates a record. And look at this. I got his name. I got his death. I got where he lived. Uh-oh, he's a widower. Who's the wife? Right? We got mother and we got father, but he's a widower. Who is that? And what other records, because here we're going to come or connect to this death certificate? A marriage record. She's deceased because he's a widower, right? So now you got their marriage to go after, and then you're going to go find her death record. And of course, did they have any children? And go forth. So hopefully you can see how every time you look at something, it just expands your research and enhances what you're doing. Take something, and we see death certificates all the time as researchers. Question the information. And right here, I'd come right here and I'd say, okay, is that a surname, or is that really just a middle name? Or is there somebody else in the Hart family coming down here, or to his mother, and say, anybody got this last name? Slave era research that I've done, I have found that I had an enslaved person that had a surname, and it wasn't the same as the slaveholder, which is very common. So that's a myth that's out there, that the enslaved people took the surname of the slaveholder. No, they did not. They also had choice to change and take whatever name they wanted when they hit to the Freedmen Bureau records and they go to these field office, because they're going to ask them what their name is, or they're going to ask them, and they can either give what their former master's name is, or take the slaveholder of their mother, grandmother, father, whoever. So don't assume automatically that they're carrying a slaveholder's name, the one that currently owns them. But you want to investigate that. So you're going to question that information. You're going to follow through. We know he's colored, so know your identifiers for colored, white, black, whatever it is. And he dies in 1956, so you're seeing colored. It could be an M in here. The M could be, and again, maybe only on an entry on a sheet, not necessarily an actual certificate, because this is later on in time. But if you're looking back during Civil War or prior to Civil War, you're not going to see a certificate like this typically. And if you're researching enslaved people, it's going to be in wherever the property records were at. Even the death notations could be in an estate settlement, or maybe they had to pay to have a coffin built or whatever. You don't know where you might find a record. And always ask the question. And the so what that Dory mentioned is basically, well, I'm saying, look at 14, Sarah Roper Hart. Well, so what? I got the mother's maiden name. What's next? So what? I got the information. Well, the first thing I'm looking at that's next is go get this woman's death certificate because it's telling me she's deceased. Next, I'm going to Roper. I want a Roper Hart marriage record. And there you go. Okay. So hopefully that's helping and giving sense. You know, this is just another way of looking at a timeline, which is critical. And this is an older version because, again, put them any way you want. There's some information I wanted to show. I'm saying here on my next steps, I got a question. Here's my next step. And then here's an example of me completing it. So, and again, you can see I don't have the informant and the witnesses. But I've found so much more information when I start questioning on certain documents, who and how do these people relate that are witnessing either a marriage or that's on a death certificate or the informant or whatever it is, a lawsuit. Who's there? Are they in the neighborhood? Maybe I'm analyzing a census and I'm going to say, well, so what? I got this information. What does it mean? You know, everything is not typical if you don't ask a question, and always start your research out with what you know. You don't have to make up anything. What do you know? And then build that timeline. And I'll go back to it in a minute. So let me recap real quick on what we got here. Timelines are very valuable. You can make one on each family line. You can make it just on a specific individual and work it as a brick wall that you're trying to resolve. So you can use a timeline various ways. There's no magic in genealogy. Stick to the basics. Don't throw your money away. You can donate it to some organization or whatever. Save your money because you're going to have to spend it on other things. But there's a lot of information like family tree webinars. You got Black Pro Gen out there. You have a lot of seminars that your local societies, historical societies, and your libraries that put on. They don't charge typically, and you want to soak up as much information as you can. Get you that good guide, like I mentioned in the beginning. Tony Burrell's book on Black genealogy called Black Roots. That is like my go-to. There are so many, but that was my go-to that I keep referencing because it keeps me grounded in just the basics. It was written in 2006, and it doesn't have a lot of the internet stuff on it. And it grounds me back to say, do these basics. So you're exhausting your search on what you know and what you have access to. Make sure you join the local groups. And if there isn't a local group, then you need to be the one to start it. You can use social media or whatever and start doing set up a page and say a certain county that you're doing. People will come. We're researchers, we're greedy, we're like sponges. You want to ask questions to those who have done it before. Share your information. Get you a genealogy buddy. Share your successes. Share your challenges, your disappointments, because you know what? It might be something that they have. And you want to analyze and question everything. That's your so what. You got the timeline tool, and then talk about every record creates a record. And I think that will help you with your research and enhance what you're doing and enhance your skills also. So I'm just going to say thank you and stop sharing and open for any other questions. And if I need to go back to the timeline, let me go back to the original one that we shared for people to look at. That was the direction, but this is the one that I'm using right now. And let's see. Yeah, it's got informant and witnesses. I attended a couple sessions and with Bernice Bennett, good friend of mine, and I kept putting who the witness was and stuff in here. And she said, just basically, girl, you got to know the informant and witnesses. So I gave them a column rather than just putting them in question that, under here in the question mark. So again, use this as a tool to tell the story, and it's going in chronological order. And for folks that don't have it, we can put a blank one, and you're welcome to use it. You got it from me. We use it at Maggie. People that are taking, Maggie is the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute. And we put, in track 1, we walk through these documents. So they're coming with their brick wall. So we're working with the document and building their research plan from the documents or what they know from there. And of course, they're trying to resolve their goal of whatever it is. Marriage certificate, find more about this, find that, or whatever. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing if people have seen enough. And for any questions, you want to share anything. So this is one of my favorite topics that I have, that I use a lot, because it helps me. If nothing else, it helps me organize my research.